Well, it's still winter, even though we are now into February, and cricket fans who are starved of going to watch any cricket should be tucked up indoors and reading a good book. Now, we had on Roland Butcher before talking about his upcoming book, but you've got to wait for that. Breaking Barriers from Barbados to England and back. But if you need something that's out now, I highly suggest a fantastic book called Balls to Fly. It's the amazing story of my guest today, Ricky Ellcock, who, well, we'll let him tell his story. Welcome along, Ricky. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Looking forward to it.
So, in a nutshell, uh, born and spent your early life in Barbados, in Redmond's village, got picked up by Malvern College, came to England. We're all set for a huge career with English cricket. Injuries stopped there. You retrained as a Virgin Atlantic captain, flying jumbo jets. Um, and here you are. Let's go back to the start. So Redmond's Village. Now that's would you say that's sort of on the west coast? It's up the hill from the coast, isn't it?
Yeah, just above Sandy Line. It's a little former slave settlement, basically. As the historians around your guests would know that at the end of slavery, basically, emancipation, the slaves were allowed to keep their little wooden huts. And a lot of them settled in various parts around Barbados. Redmond Village is basically one of the settlements that was in between a number of the slave plantations. It's a little hut. I grew up in a little wooden house, as I said, 2 rooms. These things were incredibly basic. There was no running water, electricity, toilets, things like that. My mum would cook in the back garden. And we all basically went to the little local school, which was on the edge of the village, a school by the name of Welch's Primary. And obviously named after that on the plantation that was around there was called Welch's Plantation. And so we all went there bare feet, basically. And as you could imagine, to come out of this sort of slavery, this poor, incredibly poor area, you needed to have something that was going to get you out. Probably, education was obviously one of them. Sport was the other, and maybe music or something like that. So, we were all sort of pushed in that direction to get one of those strings to our bow. As my exam period came up, when I was 11 or so, my mum and dad lot were forever pushing you, your dad, my mum and dad, and they're sort of bribing you with all kinds of things, to get you through this exam as a 11-year. Now, the secondary school system in Barbados is basically a grammar school system. So you sit an exam, you get a mark, and it takes you to the highest school. Now, the schools are sort of graded from 1 to 20, I believe, and they want you to get to one of the highest schools. So they're pushing you to get the highest mark. And my dad came up with a little scheme, which was basically, he said, look, if you get into one of the top 3 schools, I'll give you a watch. My mom, the competitor she was, she said, well, if you get into one of these top schools, I'll give you a bicycle. And of course, I managed to sit the exam, pass for a school by the name of coma. Now, this was an incredibly academic and sporting school. This is a school where the first prime minister of Barbados went to school. For instance, the first black captain of the West Indies, Sir Frank Worrell, he went to school there. Clyde Walker, Wes Hall, the great Rihanna in later years. Even in my England side, they had 2 Commonwealths in there, myself and Gladstone Small. Chris Jordan, all these people, 26, I think they've had 26 test players in the 100 years or less than 100 years of test match cricket that the West Indies has had. So this is an incredibly good school. I managed to sit the exam pass for this school, and off I went to Combermere as a 10-year-old.
Craig Brathwaite's another
Yeah,
boy,
Craig Brathwaite. Yeah, as I said, there's 26 of them. Craig Brathwaite, Jamel Warrington now, Justin Graves, the three boys that are in the West Indies team at present, they're all three of them at school at Commonwealth.
Warwick did a fantastic effort against Pakistan in Multan the other day. I was watching that.
Absolutely, the boys done very well. Incredibly well to win a series, to win a test match like that in Pakistan. Really.
First time in 34 years, I read. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
yes, yes, yes.
me, I was a young lad enjoying Barbados, and as you know, I go there a lot, and I always liked seeing the school kids going to and from school, and then playing sport. Sport is it's unbelievable the level of sporting interest in the island. I talk about it regularly. But Malvern College come a hunting. Now, what happened there? How did that come about?
Well, the watch obviously, was great pride that my dad gave to me. The other thing was the bicycle, and that got me around Barbados, which, as we hopefully we touch later, got me an interest in aviation, even at that 11 or 12 years old. But as soon as I went into Commonwealth, they sort of recognized that I could bowl a cricket ball relatively fast. So they started pushing the type of school that it was. They were pushing, push. And I went in, I don't know, the first, week or so I went into Commonwealth. The big boys were playing cricket. Now, the big boys are obviously playing with a proper bat and a little tennis ball. Up until that stage, I played cricket at home with my mom and my brother and people in the village and stuff like that. But we'd all done it with a coconut, a coconut branch. And my mom used to have little plastic balls as displays in the house. Plastic fruits as displays in the house. And we would use those plastic fruits as balls. So we start with the orange because that was the most circular thing. And then we move on to the apple and then finally the pear. And then, of course, it'd be all destroyed and she'll have to buy some more plastic.
She didn't box your ears because of all that.
Well, I think she was quite happy to have us playing rather than fighting in the house, me and my brother. So, that was my cricket up to that stage. Suddenly I arrived at Commonwealth and I saw proper cricket. I thought, all right, I'm going to have a bit of that. Pride, we used to call it crying first hand. So you got a slot basically. And I waited, I don't know, there used to be 60 boys playing a cricket match at lunchtime. And I waited, I don't know, a couple of weeks to have a slot. And suddenly I get the bat and one of the bigger boys, sixth form. Bearing in mind that Cormier's got boys at 10 years old and they've got some that's 19, So there's a big age difference between you. And one of the bigger boys, he said to me, I'll give you 25 cents for that, for your slot. And I said, well, no, waited 2 weeks to bat. I'm not going to give it up. And basically gave me a little slap across the head and said, look, go and feel. He took away the bat. So I went off to one of the other sixth formers who are vaguely new and said, look, you just slapped me around the head and taken away the bat, hoping for a little bit of satisfaction. And he basically said to me, you should have taken the 25 cents, is what he said to me. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm not going to get any satisfaction from this, I'm going to go and get the ball and I'm going to bowl at him as fast as I possibly could. And that's basically where my sort of talent or bowling talent started, with me trying to get a little bit of payback or satisfaction for him until, from then it just grew into, by the time I was 13, 14, I was playing at the top level in Barbados as playing for the combined schools who play in the top level. So, I was very advanced and going off the under 19 trials and stuff like that. And then, of course, Malvern did a tour to Barbados and turned up in Barbados. They're playing against Commonwealth along with other schools. And it very nearly didn't happen. Because that same bicycle, the day before that match, I fell off my bicycle and took the skin off my elbows and, knees and stuff like that. Anyway, I played against them. I'm frightened that they live in daylights out of them because they'd never seen a 14-year-old that could bowl the speeds that I could bowl in those days. And they went back to England and organized a scholarship for myself. And that was how I got the scholarship.
So you come over to England. That must have been a shock for you. I'm assuming at that stage you've never been away from Barbados. You've only known Barbados. So you come up to England. What did that feel like for you? And how were you treated by these English kids that have probably not had too much experience of Caribbean boys?
Well, um, I'd never been left, I left my village basically on my bike. I'd never
Yeah.
left Barbados. I didn't know anything, never been on an airplane, anything like that. And my mom was petrified about me leaving Barbados, as you could imagine, leaving, your firstborn child is now going to go somewhere that she'd never been. I mean, my mom, we live a mile and a half from the sea, and she'd never been to the sea 3, 4 times in her life. So she's not the type of person that went very far, and suddenly someone is going to ask you to send their son across to England to 5,000 miles away to do. Anyway, eventually she said, yeah. My dad was excited for it, obviously, for obvious reasons, because it was something that he would have, been born in 1937. He could not have even gone to Combermere. He wouldn't have been allowed because of his social standing and color in those days. So for a son of his to be going to England to study and to play cricket, he was incredibly excited. And so, they said yes, and I left and came to England. And I arrived in England to, as you can imagine, sensory overload. I arrive here, it's cold. It's the first time I've wearing a jacket, a blazer, or a jumper. I'd hardly wear shoes in them days. And here I am in England, television. I walked into the house the first day. First of all, I was looking at this house thinking, this is an enormous house. The people here must be incredibly rich. I come out of a 2-room wooden hut, and I didn't realize, of course, that this was a boarding house that housed 70 boys. I walked in and the television is on and it's in color. I'd never seen a color television. And then while I'm watching this thing, it started changing channels by itself. I remember thinking, what God's earth is happening there? And then realized that they had something called a remote control. You know what I mean? So this was incredibly confusing for myself. A toaster. I can still remember to this day, I'm seeing this strange implement on the side and looking at it thinking, what in God's earth is that thing? And suddenly a mate of mine, he gets up and he takes some bread, he goes and put it into this implement, and he comes back and sits at the table with burnt bread. I remember thinking, why in God's earth would you burn bread? I mean, it's just a mad thing to do, as you can imagine. And things like music, I'd come out listening to Bob Marley and Mighty Sparrow and the Mighty Gabby and people like that.
Arrow.
And suddenly, you remember that music. And
Yeah.
suddenly I walked into my study one day, and there's a kid in there, he's playing this imaginary guitar, and he's singing, I wish I could be like David Watts. And I'm thinking, who in God's earth is David Watts? You know what I mean? And then, eventually he stopped and he said, Ray, do you like the Jam? And I thought, well, what kind? And he said, well, no, not the type you eat, the band, that's that. So, all of these were really strange things, as well as cold and windy and meeting, the kids looking at me like I had 12 heads because I hadn't seen many black people. I was looking at them like they had 12 heads because, I'd never seen so many white people in one spot. All the white people in Barbados that I knew live in massive houses and drove big cars and owned, shops in Bridgetown or whatever. So it was all a really, really strange experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, this trajectory you're taking, I mean, clearly you were destined to fly because your trajectory from Redmond Village through Combermere, through Malvern, you find yourself at Gloucester playing first-class cricket.
Worcester.
Oh, Worcester, sorry.
Yeah. Well, I obviously played for Malvern and did really well, playing for them. There's some issues, obviously, playing schoolboy cricket with the speed that I could bowl. I remember you remember John Carr, who played with myself at Middlesex, as a matter of fact. I remember him playing for Repton and I playing for Malvern. He got hit on the head and the Masters decided to call the game off. And, turning up at Harrow, for instance, and before I even got off the boss, the emperor, sort of saying, you bowl one short ball today, and I'm gonna send you off. So there were issues around me playing that cricket. People saying, "Oh, you brought a professional over to play against school cricket and everything." But anyway, Worcester eventually sort of thought, right, we want this kid. So that very same summer that I came over, I was signed to play for Worcester. So 16 at the time, 15 and a bit, and off I went during the summer to play summer cricket for second 11 cricket for Worcester. So I'm traveling all around the country. Here me coming a little hot in Barbados, and I'm traveling around. I'm traveling around Great Britain in coaches and cars, and meeting these players that I'd only ever heard about, and in the dressing room with some of them. So it was an amazing period, and in the following year, I was selected to make my debut as a 17-year-old. And the funny thing about this, I was in class. Basically, they came in and said, "Right, Worcester wants you to play for them tomorrow." And I says, oh, "Okay," incredibly excited. What I didn't realize is that the headmaster at the time had sort of said, "No, I don't think so." And then people have got together and said, "Look, you got to let this kid play. We haven't had a player at this school while at school playing first class cricket before. So you ought to give him the opportunity." So he said, "Yeah," but he said, "Right, but you got to come back to the school every night, and you got to wear school uniform." So you can imagine I turning up to my first county game in a public school boy uniform. You imagine the hilarity that caused amongst my teammates. 17 years old, wearing school uniform to your first class game.
But there was a thing around that time, we're talking early 80s, that there was the uproar. I remember when Michael Holding came on the scene in the mid 70s, and they didn't like him bowling fast. Remember the famous thing with him bowling at blind times? And the authorities were trying to do whatever to fight against it. But then it flipped the other way. By the time you're on the scene, pretty much every county seemed to have the need to have a West Indian fast bowler playing. I can think of lots and lots and lots.
Yeah, absolutely. There were a heap of them. I was still with myself, was Hartley Allen, at Middlesex, my first county game. Middlesex, there was Wayne Daniel, Norman Collins, Neil Williams. If you went to Essex, there was Norbert Phillips. They were everywhere. So it's probably a good time for me to come on the scene, but difficult because I was 17 at the time. 16, 17 when I made my debut, and very young. Had no idea how to manage my body, how to understand. I could bowl fast, of course, but and everybody wanted a piece of me, So because I was so young, I was playing on the 17, I was playing on the 19, on the 25, second 11, first class cricket, and of course, sometimes when you play a first class game, when those players were resting, you were then playing for the under 25. And of course, that was basically a car crash waiting to happen, which eventually it did.
Yeah, so you had your first brush with injury around about this time. So was it a stress fracture that was...
Yes, I was in pain for a long time. And in those days, if you weren't bowling fast, it was a cruel world in professional cricket. If you weren't able to bowl fast as a fast bowler, nobody was interested in you. So I spent a period at Worcester when I was basically a leper, pretty Ricky no mates. Nobody wanted to speak to you or see you or anything like that. And there I was in pain, as a I don't know, 19-year-old or whatever it was at the time, and very, very lonely, and miserable, absolutely miserable. And eventually, my landlady, she basically one day phoned the club and said, "Look, if you don't do something about this kid, I am, and then I'm going to the papers." And then they thought, okay, well, maybe we'll do something. So they sent me off to Birmingham Hospital, I believe it was, and did some X-rays, and I had stress fractures at the back.
Did you feel like going home?
Well, I couldn't go home. A, was on the contract, and B, this is where the treatment was going to be to sort it out. So I needed it sorted, and that was done basically by putting me in a plaster cast, basically from underneath my neck all the way down to the top of my private parts.
Oh,
And basically, I had that on for 6 months. And so that in itself was a miserable time, as you can imagine, a kid with a plaster cast around his body, and having to lie down basically for the fullness of time, and try and get these things healed.
how did you build yourself back up after that once the cast was removed? It must have been quite a thing to get fit again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the cast itself was the most incredibly nightmarish thing you can have. You can't imagine you can imagine having it on your hand if you have a broken hand. But you have that thing around your body. You can't move. You can't shower. You can't do all kinds of things. You normally get an itch in the middle of your back. I remember, and then you need a knitting needle to sort of scratch it and stuff like that. It was just a miserable sort of period in my life. I remember after 6 weeks, I went back to the doctor. I would go to the doctor every 6 weeks. And I remember thinking, right, I took a bar of soap and I'm going to wash myself and whatever. And I got there and he sort of pushed the front of it and he said, oh, it's going a little bit soft in the front. Can you reinforce it to this nurse? And she said, okay. And she basically reinforced it. And he said, right, keep it on for another 6 weeks. And I remember coming home and thinking, man, I could end this all. This is not good, But, eventually they took it off. And then I went through another miserable sort of rehab program of trying to get fit again, which, is basically starting in the pool, treading water for hours on end until eventually you start running and then weights. And then, you bowl your first ball. And that usually takes about 6 months training.
Okay, so let's fast forward a little bit. Middlesex next and England.
Yeah, after sort of miserable years at Worcester, I asked to leave, which the club sort of denied me a couple of years at a time. They sent me off to play in bloody Yorkshire with Raymond Illingworth because they didn't want me around Worcester, basically, I think. And I was miserable, so I keep asking. And then eventually, I think in 1988, they said, yes, you could speak to other people. And instantly, a heap of counties came in. I don't know. I had 9 offers or something from county things. And I chose Middlesex as the team, which, was basically because Desmond Haynes at the time had just joined Middlesex, and he phoned me up and said, look, you got to join me at Middlesex, and so I went off and did that. And as soon as I arrived at Middlesex, after a brief period of injury to start with, this all injury again, I then had a season that you won't believe, which got heaps of wickets, ended at the end of the season with selection for England.
Yeah, I've seen a really superb photograph of you with Angus Fraser, Roland
Yeah,
Butcher,
Roland
and
Butcher.
this must have been when you were selected for England, because Gladstone Small was in that picture, and yeah, and
Oh,
Angus Fraser.
not Butcher. It was Angus Fraser, Gladstone Small, Daffy De Freitas,
Staffy, yeah,
myself, and Devon Malcolm,
yeah,
all in that photo. Yes, and that was one of the promotional photos for that tour. So that was basically the fast bowling, that they were going to use on the tour. And I don't know if you're going to move into this, but we obviously went off to the Caribbean, and very soon after I got to the Caribbean, it basically I was back in pain again, and I tried everything to try and sort it out. They give me rest, So the early matches of the tour I didn't play, and so they were resting me, and I was trying all kinds of things. Acupuncture, I tried acupuncture for the first time in
yeah.
a little back street place in the middle St. Lucia, I went off. I saw a little thing in the paper. I went off and asked this woman to commit, acupuncture myself. And I can still remember to this day when Mickey Stewart found out. I believe old NASA must have told him because we were rooming together. And Mickey, he called me to his room, and he went ape shit. He just lost it, And he said, "Why in God's earth, Rick, would you do something like that? This is the age of AIDS, and you're letting someone stick needles in your back in the middle of St. Lucia." I said, "Mickey, I'm desperate.
Yeah.
I just want to play. I was clutching at straws." I remember, and NASA probably tell you this story. We were in Barbados on the Barbados leg of the tour, and I'm lying in my room at the Rockley Hotel in Barbados, and the phone rang, and it's a gentleman on the phone, and he said, "Are you Ricky Ellcock?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You got a bad back, haven't you?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you, I got a cure for you." I said, "What's that?" He says, "Go and buy a bottle of WD-40 and spray it on your back." Yeah. And I remember I looked at Nas and I said, "Nas, have you heard that?" And Nas said, "Yeah, he's talking shit, man." And then I lied down. I thought, suppose it works. You know what I mean? Suppose it worked. And I walked down to the bottom of the street, bought a can of WD-40, came back, sprayed it on my back. And of course, it didn't work.
Uh-huh.
And anyway, eventually that was the end of my tour. They said, "Look, you need to go home and get some proper treatment." So I was shipped back to England, and it was diagnosed with strict stress fractures, L3, 4, and 5. So no end of WD-40 or acupuncture or anything else that I had that was ever going to sort that out, apart from corrective surgery.
So was that basically the end of your playing career at that point?
No, I came back. They did operation, and the operation was quite technical because my stress fractures were L3, 4, and 5. Most people in those days, both of them had it, and a few others had sort of corrective surgery for bad backs. Was usually it would be L5 and S1, the two lowest bones in your back, and but mine was a bit higher, so they couldn't actually correct them like that. What they had to do was to take bone off my hip and graft them into the thing and then screw them together with some titanium screws. So I got 6 titanium screws still to this day in my back. And once they'd done that, I spent another 6 months in plaster cast, the same thing, from underneath my chin down to the bit of my private parts. And quite often they put one of your feet in plaster as well, just to make sure you didn't move. And that was, I was out for 6 months. And then after that, they came back and did the rehab process all over again, as I'd done years ago, treading water and all that kind of stuff, until I actually played in 1991.
So tell me about Virgin Atlantic. How did that happen?
Well, after 1991, I came back, played, and then I was in pain again. And they did some x-rays and whatever, and they couldn't find anything. So they said, right, we're doing an exploratory operation again. So this is 91 now. They did an exploratory operation, and they basically found that I'd done an amazing amount of damage in my back, which they couldn't understand how I was even playing with that thing, So the bones had snapped again, the screws had snapped. So they had to drill the screws out and replace them and replace the bone graft, a whole messy thing. But I did a rehab again, came back, and at the beginning of 92, I actually started playing. And then the pains come, and basically at that stage, the doctor said, "We're not going to do any more operations. You need to stop playing, otherwise you're going to cripple yourself." So then I went through a period of the most unimaginable depression as you could imagine. Here I was at 24, career's finished. and I have no idea what I was going to do. Depressed beyond belief. Couple of days, I wouldn't get out of bed, and depression you could imagine. And then eventually, my wife at the time, she said, "Look, go and see my mom. She's a doctor." I went off and saw Mary, and Mary basically did all the tests and everything. Said nothing's wrong with you, basically, except for your back. I think you need to get out of England and go away to somewhere that you're not actually going to be seeing or playing cricket. So I went off to America doing a tour, basically. I toured around America, and I went off to, Amarillo, Texas. I wanted, because I'd watched the movie Top Gun, I wanted to go to Miramar. And I went off to Miramar, watched these jets fly around. And that's when I thought, my passion. Now, this is a passion that, we probably should cover, because it relates back to that very same bicycle, and that's where my flying basically started.
So you got your £60,000 together. Was that enough just to, well, clearly you got through, but how did you get through on that money?
Well, I knew that I had one shot of everything. If I failed anything, I was going to run out of money, because, these exams are, 3,000 for the ground exams are 3,000 a shot, £3,000 a shot. For the flying, one of the flying courses is 40 hours in a twin engine airplane, and that's at £500 an hour. So you're talking £20,000, that one thing. So if you fail that and you got to resit it, can you imagine? I would just not going to be able to do it. Meanwhile, I've got sort of mates around me that, fail these things and just resit them because, mommy and daddy is paying for them or whatever. And so I just worked my backside off. I worked and I worked. I'd be up into the wee hours of the morning studying these things. And fortunately, I managed to pass them all first time, and came out with a brand spanking new airline transport pilot license at the end of it. So luck or just hard work, I suppose. And then I tried to get a job. I came up with this new license, assumed that everybody would give me a job, and I just wrote to everybody. Every airline. I wrote tens of letters to airlines, and nobody. I used to get these letters back, and I used to call them FOLs, which you can imagine what the F stand for. The O was for off, and L was for letters, of course. And usually they would start, unfortunately, or regret. They're all very nice letters.
Did you have your dad's words ringing in your ears? Black guys don't fly planes.
Yeah, black people don't fly airplanes. And meanwhile, all of my colleagues at flight school are all flying for airlines. They all write me and says, "Oh, I just got a job at Air UK. Just got a job at British Airways. I just got a job with this buddy." And then I'm thinking, it's even more galling for me, because I'm thinking, oh, that guy failed meteorology 3 times. I managed to get through it first time, and I can't get a job. And I just couldn't. Eventually, the job that I got was in the Caribbean.
Leah,
yeah, Leah phoned me one Thursday afternoon. I can still remember that now. One Thursday afternoon, they phoned up and said, "Look, we're inviting you for an interview." I thought, "Oh, good, finally, But the interview is on the Monday morning, and you got to remember that this is the days before computers. So you're having to buy a paper ticket. You're having to phone around to the travel companies and ask for the price of tickets and whatever. And I had no money. I had none. I was living off my wife's wages at the time, and so she was feeding me and clothing me, And again, her mom, Dr. Mary Toff, always remember that. And I spoke to her about 10 minutes ago. She came to the rescue again. She said, "Look, I'll buy the ticket for you." And she bought the ticket for me. And I went off to Antigua on the Sunday evening, arrived in Antigua 3 o'clock that Sunday evening. I went off and did the interview the next morning with the help of a lot of people. A guy by the name of Zora Bartley, for instance, who I played against. He was the captain of the Leeward Islands under 19 team back in 1983, when I played for Barbados, and he was playing for the Leeward Islands. He was the only body I knew in Antigua. And I phoned up Zoril and said, Zoril, I'm in Antigua. He says, okay, come. I said, I got nowhere to live, nowhere to, no car to drive, nothing. And he says, oh, don't worry. He organized a little place for me to stay. And he would drop me back up to Liat on a daily basis. And the young lady at the airport took a liking to myself, and she would feed me every day. She had a little stall at the airport, and she would give me lunch on a day. And then, of course, when I got my first pay packet, I managed to repay them all.
Fantastic. So that's Liat. Virgin, how did that happen?
Well, while I was playing for Liat, I spent almost 80,000 on this license, and I was determined that I was going to fly the best aircraft that I could. The best aircraft at the time was probably Concorde. The next one was a jumbo, 747, and I wanted to fly one of those things because I needed to use my license to the maximum. So I would, every time I get a couple of 100 hours, I would write off all the same airlines that I'd written to, sort of in the years before, and said, look, I've got 200 more hours. Do you fancy having a look at me, And they would all send me back some FOLs. And then on this particular day, I got basically a letter from Virgin Atlantic saying, we're offering you an interview on whatever date it was. And then I had to try and get from Antigua to London to do this interview, and that in itself was difficult because, of course, I was bunking off work to do it. Bunking off flying for Liat to do it. I managed to get here, walked into the interview, did the interview. They asked me all kinds of questions, which I managed to answer. And then at the end of the interview, they were going to have a sort of group discussion. And there I was, this pilot walked towards me and he says, hey, Ricky, which part of Barbados are you from? I says, well, do you know Barbados quite well? And he said, yeah, of course. My wife is a Barbadian, and I myself has got a Barbadian passport. And that guy was the chief pilot of Virgin Atlantic at the time. And within a couple of weeks of that, I had a letter from Virgin Atlantic invited me to join them. 8th of May 1997, first black pilot that they'd ever hired. And then I spent the next 7 years flying for Virgin as a second officer to start with, then 2 years later as a first officer, 2 years after that, senior first officer. And then finally I was invited to be a captain in 2004.
It's going fantastic, but then a problem happens.
Yeah, I joined Virgin, so I became a captain in 2005. Did my first flight, and that was amazing. Can you imagine sitting on the runway, the first flight, 747 as a captain, and I was sitting there waiting for them to give me a takeoff clearance. And I can still remember thinking to myself, I would love my dad to be here. I would love my housemaster to be here. I love the guy that sponsored my scholarship to be here.
I might even have been there.
Well, you might have been, of course. But I remember thinking, if you ask most little kids what they would like to do, I suspect a vast number of them would say, I'd like to be a professional sportsman. Well, I've done that, and if you ask another set of them, I'm sure they would say, I'd like to be a pilot. And I've done that too. So I remember thinking, you're such a lucky boy. You're so blessed. Anyway, I flew for Virgin as a captain for 9 years. And then on this particular day back in 2014, I'm flying David Smith and Alan Wells. You remember those two? David Smith, the Surrey left-hander. Alan Wells, the Sussex all-rounder. And they sent me a little note up to the flight deck, basically saying, hey, Ricky, we're sitting in 47F. We'd like to know if you could get further up the bus to start with, and then we'd like to see the cockpit. I said, well, look, I could probably get you further up the bus, but I can't show you the cockpit because the rules say that we're not allowed to do it in the air. Anyway, as soon as we landed, they all came up and I showed them around, took some pictures and whatever. And by that stage, it was a little bit late for getting the crew bus back to the hotel. And I ran up the flight deck, coming down the stairs of the jumbo, and basically fell down the stairs and ripped the ligaments in my knee, which took corrective surgery to sort it out. So I was out of flying for 9 months. Came back to flying on the jumbo. I spent another, a few months on the jumbo before transferring to the 787, the Dreamliner, which is the newest airplane that Virgin has got now. And as soon as I started flying that thing, I started to have headaches and weird vision and coordination problems and all kinds of things. And I assumed that it was to do with just jet lag. I mean, that's the kind of thing that pilots get anywhere, and at the time I was doing my master's as well. So it was a sort of rough time, not sleeping very well and stuff. Anyway, I went into the bank on the way from LA in 2018 and woke up basically paralyzed down one side. So I couldn't move my hand, I couldn't move my foot, weird thing. My blood has gone all crazy. And we had to declare an emergency, and basically we landed at Heathrow, taken away in an ambulance to Hillingdon Hospital, which is about 15 minutes or so from Heathrow. I get there, they did all the tests that they couldn't find anything, decided that they would do a CT scan. And the minute they did the CT scan, the whole place changed. I'm thinking, this is bad. I've got brain tumor, it's a stroke, it's cancer, it's going to be something really nasty. And eventually the surgeon, he turns up and he said, he said to me, have you had a fall? And I said, no, I haven't, 4 years ago maybe, but not recently. And he says, okay, have you had a car accident or anything like that? I said, no. And anyway, he said, look, you've got subdural hematoma. This is what you've got. And I said, oh, okay. The minute I heard hematoma, I thought, that's not a big deal. I'm okay. I get hematomas under my toenail when I was bowling every summer. So I assume it's fine. I said, look, I'll go home, have something to eat, I'm tired, and you could deal with it in the morning. And she basically said, you're very lucky that you're not dead already, so you're not going anywhere. This needs to be sorted today, right now. And so I was rushed into surgery, and I had brain operation, which you could probably see the scar on the top of my head there. Basically, they open the flap of your head and take the blood out, and off I went. So that was, I thought, was finished. I went home, started to have headaches again, and got an Uber back to the hospital, and they said, right, you've got another brain bleed. What's happening? Anyway, they opened the flap again, took the blood out, sent me home, gone home. The same thing happened again. I woke up in Frimley Park Hospital in effect when they did some more CT scans and found that the brain bleed was back. And then I started to have seizures, major seizures. And I'll tell you, one of the seizures I had was on the 22nd of January, I believe, 2019. I went into a toilet at St. Mary's Hospital and had this seizure in there. And I'm lying on the floor seizing. I could hear people coming to the door, going away because the door is locked. And I can't get out. Eventually, I managed to get the door open. And that seizure went on for a further 45 minutes. Oh. Now, while I was in this toilet, I'm thinking to myself, there's two things here. Three things here. Don't ever lock a toilet door again, which is going to come back and haunt me at some stage. The shower was wetting me. I remember thinking, don't ever have a bath, because I knew that if I was in a bath, I would drown. And the third thing, I was thinking, my mom is outside waiting to see me. Do not die today. Maybe tomorrow, but not today. As I said, that seizure went on for a further 45 minutes, hour and a half of seizure. And the only way they could stop it, A, was my determination not to die. And the second thing, they had to induce a coma. And I was in a coma for 4 days while they sorted it out. Came out of the coma, they did an MRI. God knows why they'd never done an MRI before. And that they found the problem through the MRI, which was basically a membrane built up in my head from the fall, 4 years previous to that. And that membrane had now grown big enough that it was shifting my brain to one side. And that's what was causing the seizures. Once they cleared the membrane, I has been touch wood. I've been seizure free since then, and they still call me at St. Mary's the miracle boy because that particular thing kills 99% of people that it has it, and if it doesn't kill you, it leaves you with some kind of deficiency cognitively or physically. And touch wood, I've got on my fingers, as you can see, and I can see, and the only thing is the scar in my head.
Well, it's an amazing recovery. And yeah, if I was to meet you in the street and shake hands, I wouldn't say there was anything at all, but I guess you've still got to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got, as I said, they call me the miracle boy. If I go for checkups every 2 years now, and they still say, "Oh, miracle boy's back," and but I haven't been left with anything. Typing sometimes is a little bit of an issue, but apart from that, I am absolutely fine.
Well, I'm pleased to hear it. So,
It's
for the full version of this story, please go out and buy Balls to Fly. It's out
I,
now, available everywhere you get your books. It's just fantastic. I'm sure your appetite for Ricky's story would have been whetted by this conversation. Ricky, it's been a real honor to do this. Looking forward and trying to do this for a long time now. And I'm really pleased that we've done this. Before I let you go, I'm going to
yeah,
ask you a few questions. East cutter or pudding and sauce?
I'm putting this out.
East Coast or West Coast?
I like the East Coast. If I'm got a lot of money, I'll go on the West Coast.
And final one, Banks beer or Mount Gay rum?
Mount Gay rum, before a shot over that. It's the original 1703. It's been going and it's still going today strong. The first rum that's ever been made. Remember that. The original rum. Don't let anybody tell you about Appletons or anything like that. Mount Gay rum, the original rum.
Ricky Ellcock, Captain Ricky Ellcock. It has really been a privilege for me to meet you and talk to you like this. And I would love to shake hands with you in the near future and talk plenty more.
Hopefully,
Plenty
we'll do
more.
it in Barbados at some stage.
Yeah, I'd love that. Ricky Alcock, many, many thanks.